Hello, welcome to River Reflections. I am Rosemary. My husband Robert is sitting within eyesight of me, but not you. Together we started the church you just saw in the picture, and I don't know when you're going to see this particular video. Maybe you'll see it on YouTube 2 years from now, for all I know. But at this moment, we just celebrated our 42nd church anniversary. And we had such a sweet time. You know, we used to do programs that we did a whole lot more planning when it was a special program, but for this program in particular, we decided to see what was going to happen and just did open pulpit. Some of us had numbers to share, which is great. I like that too. But there were just a whole lot of, okay, who wants to give an open pulpit about what God did for you last year? And people got up and shared it, and it was so precious. The whole atmosphere was flooded with thanksgiving, love for God, love for each other. I appreciate him so much. I like having a church service when it's very, very simple. The older I get, the further away I get from the fantastic. And you know, I know God uses that. I think back to our fantastic, not God's fantastic. I love if he comes through with a wave of prophetic move or healing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about us making plans for things to be dazzling. That's what I'm talking about. And I think back to, and God uses that. When people are like that, he uses it. I think back to a lady, what year would that be? The 20s, 30s, named Amy Semple McPherson in Los Angeles, California. And hundreds, including Marilyn Monroe, actually went to her church as a kid for a while. Well-known people would go to her church, and her trademark was every weekend there'd be some sort of a surprise, wonderful, dramatic service. She'd act out her sermons and have all these special effects, sound effects, visual effects. Every sermon, every service became this huge production, which that's what God used her for. I'm not saying God never uses that. I'm saying for me, at this point, I'm glad that he's always put us in a place, but it feels like even more so of having a church that feels a lot like services in our home that we started out with for the first 4 years, even though now we're in a building. I love the idea of a church service being just plain homey, interactive, not just one of us talking at you, but that you can dialogue along with us as we're ministering. People get up and share in open pulpits. It's just, for me, a wonderful place to be. Now, as much as God gives different pastors vision for how the church they're in charge of is supposed to be, if the pastor's in charge of the church, which we are. I know there's other forms of church government. I feel so sorry for the pastors that have to do whatever the consistory or the deacons and elders think they ought to do. That way, I heard Mario Murillo talking about every pastor is preaching the sermon that he thinks he ought to be doing instead of the one he really wants to do. Well, to me, that's true for people that are under the authority of a group of people, rather than given the liberty to hear God for themselves and share. I would not be a good pastor in that circumstance. I would be fired so fast. Anyway, moving right along. I just love what God's given us. And if what I'm describing sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, you're so welcome to come. We're not for everybody, but a lot of people that have found us are like, this is what I wanted, this is what I was looking for. And you'll know when you come. I believe with all of my heart that God has a local church for every single believer, and that when you visit that church a few times, God makes it plain to you, this is where I want you. Maybe for 3 years, maybe for 30 years. That's not the point. God shows us. His sheep hear his voice. So if you think what I'm describing is something God's leading you towards, come on and check it out. Anyway, I have been preaching. I thought I'd be off this topic this week. And what might happen is I finish last week's sermon and move into what I thought would be all for this week. But last week I was talking to you about how Jesus, and we're supposed to follow how he is, and I even speculated on why in the world was he like this? Excuse me. How he so often, first of all, he'd tell people after he'd healed them, don't tell anybody that I did it. Not that they were healed, but that this is how it happened. Secondly, there'd be people that wanted him to stay, and he'd be like, no, I have to go to these other towns. He didn't let anybody hold him down. And if there was huge crowds following him around, he wasn't into that. He wasn't looking for popularity and publicity and the adoration of huge crowds. He drew huge crowds, but he knew the motivation. He knew that some were there genuinely to hear what God would say through him, but he also knew, and probably he knew very well, the vast majority of people were there to see what he'd do next, to see if he'd do all kinds of food again, or if he'd heal somebody again, or perhaps he'd even raise the dead like he did Lazarus. They wanted to see what was going on. Some were hungry to be around him for the right reasons, and some wanted to see him for wrong motivation. And he even knew clearly that there were so many times religious leaders would come, they'd be jealous of him, and they'd look for ways to find fault. They'd look for some sentence he'd say that they could find fault with. Or they'd look to see, now is he going to heal this guy on the Sabbath? He knows it's against the law to heal somebody on a Sabbath, which is very hypocritical, because he pointed out to them, if your animal falls in a ditch on a Sabbath, you don't care anything about going to get him out of the ditch. How much more wouldn't it be right to do good on the Sabbath and heal somebody? He wasn't scared of them. He wasn't scared of their accusations. He knew eventually the accusations would get him crucified. He knew that. He knew that's what he came to do. But he also had a pretty good sense of timing about when this would occur. But there were all different motivations people would come to Jesus' meetings, and Jesus knew that. And the things that we look for, and I think I was closing out saying that if we had a really great like my husband sings beautifully, and he wears that like a handshake, like he gives freely, like you would going around shaking hands with people. If he wants to just up and sing a song, he sings a song. He's not looking for someone to give a bunch of money. No, he's sung at funerals and weddings where somebody does give him an offering. As a matter of fact, it's usually right in the life insurance. This is how much goes to the organist. This is how much goes to the singer. This, it's right there. That's already decided before they even heard of Robert Barnes. So nobody's going to tell him, no, you can keep your $100. But on the other hand, we freely sung on the street to people. It would never occur for us to say, now give us some money because we just sang. The Lord freely gives, we freely give in those kinds of things. He uses his talent like that. Had he fine-tuned that talent and used it for earthly gain, I'm sure my husband could have got gobs of earthly gain from the gift that God's given him. And he's pretty easy on the eyes, too. And he's very nice. So there's a lot of ways he could have been, Tony Bennett's still out there making money. I'm sure Robert could, too. Tony Bennett's older than he is. Is he 92 now? He's still handsome, too. And sounds good. Unless he died last week, I'm unaware. But I'm speaking of knowledge of a year or so ago. I hope he didn't die. But anyway, Jesus did not think like that. He did not think about how can I gather bigger crowds, get a stadium. I'm bigger than everybody else if I have 50,000 people come to see me. Now I've made it on this earth. He did not think like that at all. In fact, he avoided that for as long as he could. Anyway, after he tells somebody, don't say anything, which happened a lot, the person would, for instance, in Mark 1:45, and I've been coming from the book of Mark basically in all my verse references, this guy that he just said, don't say anything, but he went out, and this was everybody, but this particular guy right now is who we're talking about, and began to publish it much and blaze abroad the matter, insomuch, now this is what happened, I alluded to that last week, that I speculate on the reasons that maybe Jesus didn't want people to do that, but one, that it does say is that he loses his freedom of movement as soon as it happens. And to tell you the truth, I feel downright sorry for somebody who has been a private citizen, like a Justin Bieber. All of a sudden he becomes wildly popular, or Beyonce and Jay-Z, or all these world-known names of artists, music artists, secular in this case. And do you think that they could just do like you and I do? I can stroll into a Goodwill and buy a top. Do you think that Beyonce could stroll into a Goodwill and search for a top to wear? Well, there's so many reasons she couldn't do that. So many reasons. I have total liberty. Her liberty is limited as to where she can go without being crowded. And people be on their cell phones and says, get over here fast. You would not believe who's in this Goodwill. Now, come right now, come right now. Everybody would be doing that. By the time she came out the door, there'd be hundreds of people there just to see Beyonce. You don't think that's true? I do. I think that's true. If they could get there, they'd be there. And this is what happened to Jesus. After people did what he said don't do, they told everybody. It said, after he went out published, and he blazed abroad the matter, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city, but was without in desert places, and they came to him from every quarter. It stifled his ability to move about freely and just listen, do this miracle, speak to these people, preach this, do that. People just had such big mouths that there went that. Now, some people, you might think, oh, that'd be so cool to have a life like that where you're so popular. I don't think so. I think that'd wear off real quick. I would think about a year of that, and you'd be ready to want to put on your shades and pull down some hat and wear some baggy something or other and hope nobody recognized you, so you could just go to the beach and look at the water if you wanted to. Just enjoy yourself. But Jesus got to the point, and it says in Mark 3:9, he spake to his disciples that a small ship should wait on him because of the multitude. That's what those movie stars do. Let's put the limousine behind the kitchen part of this big hotel where the venue, that was our venue for this concert, and I'll sneak through the kitchen and get into this car. Maybe not even a limo, because that would be obvious. Anyway, lest they should throng him. Lest they should throng him. And that means to rub way too closely, to crowd him. Jesus was trying to avoid that. Sometimes that's the word that's literally translated as being troubled. You're troubled by it. The throng's gotten to, is to be crowded together in great numbers. You're flocked, you're swarmed. Do you realize people have died in mobs like that? When everybody's swarming to see a certain thing. And it says in chapter 3, verse 10 of Mark, for he had healed many, insomuch that they pressed upon him for to touch him, as many as had plagues. And unclean spirits, when they saw him, fell down before him and cried, saying, thou art the Son of God. Well, my husband, as we were talking about this between programs, my husband pointed out Jesus still had a human body. He would get weary sometime. So he was willing to minister to people, but there was time he needed to be alone. And one of the points I made before, did I make it in this part too, that as well, in that as ministers, we can love people so much and want to minister to everybody, but we fail to listen to our Father say, okay, that's enough. You go home and rest now. Jesus said to the disciples, come apart and rest a while. And I heard somebody in a sermon say, come apart before you fall apart. So Jesus had to be mindful of the fact he needed rest too. But people, left up to people, I'm telling you, we have to hear God, because if you have a special gift, now I have some gifts that manifest from time to time. It's strange too. The strange thing is sometimes my husband will say to me, we're going to prophesy now, and God will give me something. But left on my own, sometimes I hear him say prophesy, and other times I I don't, in other words, you can't just necessarily push a button and things just tumble out of you. But if you have just given out to a group of people and you hit on something every time, everybody wants some of that. Everybody wants a word from God. Even if they're not saved, they'll do it like a parlor game. Wonder if they'll figure out something about me. I don't mind somebody telling me what they think God is saying to me. I may take it, but people want to get something, and they wanted even more from Jesus because they could see huge results all the time. And sometimes he just deliberately left everybody. We have to learn that, not just as ministers, people, period. We should know when we've had enough so we can give to our first priorities. It says in verse 12 of chapter 3, and he straightly charged them after all these miracles and cast out demons again. And he straightly charged them they would not make him known. Boy, he'd set up people to disobey him because they never obeyed that. And he goeth up into a mountain and calleth unto him whom he would, and they came unto him. There's another lesson to be learned from the Lord. Do not feel guilty if you decide, I'm going over here and I'm only going to invite so-and-so and so-and-so. Don't ever feel guilty about that. If God is saying, get together with these 6 people, get together with those 6 people. You know, how jealous do you think? You know, Jesus told the disciples, the 3 disciples that were with him when he was transfigured before them, he told them, don't tell anybody about this until after my resurrection. But if they had told the other disciples, we just went on a mountaintop with Jesus, and then he just started to glisten, and Elijah and Moses showed up. How jealous would the disciples be if they knew Jesus knew that was going to happen? And he did, because he said they would see his kingdom. And that's what he meant. They saw the kingdom of God manifest before them. They saw the king in his true glory. How jealous would not the other disciples be, thinking, how come he didn't invite me? How come he didn't invite me to this? You know, but don't ever feel guilty because Jesus did it. He did that. He had a few special close friends, and he'd say, I'm going to go up to this mountain. Everybody wanted to be with him. But he knew his limitations in the flesh. I don't mean the wicked flesh. I mean the tired, weary, needs some sleep flesh. And he just asked a few people to come up with him when he got alone. And that's okay. In Mark 2, verse 1, and he entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was noised that he was in the house. People in their mouth. They keep publishing. He can't seem to cut a break there, right? So I think that's one reason he constantly said, don't tell anybody. He knew that people were going to run off the mouth. He was just trying to keep it to as low roar as possible as he went about doing the business of the Father. It was noise that he was in the house. Verse 2, and straightway many were gathered together. Everybody showed up. Everybody showed up. Jesus is here. Everybody showed up. Why? Because he healed and delivered. If I said right now, I've seen posters like this, and I'm sorry, I'm cynical. Don't put on your poster, the dead are raised, the blind receive their sight, the deaf hear. Don't say that's going to happen that night. Just have your meeting and let it happen. Don't say it ahead of time, because first of all, the people that say that, often it doesn't. They just manage to get a crowd. And secondly, you ain't going to need publicity once the Lord actually uses that for that to happen. You can forget about those jive posters. People are going to tell everybody they can think of, because everybody seems to need something on that order. Anyway, as soon as people told everybody and people started showing up, there was no room to receive them. Not so much as about the door, and he preached the word unto them. And they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4. Now, this was really cool. This guy lost a portion of his roof on account of this. These guys wanted this dude to get healed so bad, their friend. They cut a hole in the roof, uncovered the roof where he was. When they had broken it up, they let down the bed where the sick was. They came right through the roof and put him at Jesus' feet. Jesus honored their faith. He saw their faith, And he said to the sick of the palsy, thy sins be forgiven thee, and he healed him. Which is amazing. Just amazing how people found a way to get to Jesus. I'm telling you, if we have a move of the Lord, any one of our churches, and the Lord is showing up doing things like this, you do not have to worry about publicity. People will come from all over the place to be in your service. And you know what? I don't think that the fact that we don't always have things like going on, that makes us bad or unfaithful. God has seasons of healing and refreshing. He comes through with seasons of revival. And there's times it's just about loving on each other, believing by faith rather than sight, just faithfully preaching and teaching and praying. And then sometimes God comes through with a whoosh. But when it's a huge whoosh, people hear about it. I remember years ago there was this little church on National Street in Grand Rapids near Northwest Side. Little. The place itself was no bigger than this little studio setup of our set right here. Maybe a little bigger, but not much. People heard about what was going on at that church, and they came from all over the place, even preachers, to see what in the world was going on at that church. And you could just sense the presence of God. I didn't even see a lot of miracles going on. It was just the beginning of a special time of praise and worship and sensing and longing for the presence of God, and he was showing up. His felt presence was showing up in those services. You don't need a lot of advertisement when God actually starts to do something special. And when people experience something wonderful, they will tell people they love about it. Okay, so somehow I got a duplicate page. Okay, I wanted to tell you about this one guy because I was analyzing what it was about Jesus that didn't want people to know where he was sometime. He'd run off to go by himself, and then people somehow would find him. Or he didn't want people to know what he was doing. And you got to know, and this is typical, when somebody is powerful, the next thing you know, somebody wants to harness them. Harness them and tame them and exploit them. I'll give you an example. This is a secular example. Say they find a group like a Michael Jackson. He's powerful. Somebody wants to sign him up in a contract and lock him in and somehow find a way to get as much money as the person with the talent doing all the work through their contract with that person. This is human nature. I see somebody who's got something. You hope you find, I'm talking in the flesh now, how wrongful flesh thinks. You hope you can get them under your clutches before they find out just what they have and how much they're worth to people in the world, so that you can write a contract and you can benefit as much or more off that person than they do themselves. You understand what I'm saying? That's how humans are. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that would have loved to harness Jesus in that fashion. Make him their very own pony and cart show. Their own benefit. Their own little, what do they call that? The goose that lays the golden eggs. Something they can benefit by. And for some reason, and you might want to read about this guy because it's fascinating, but there was a guy, an Indian guy, Geronimo. Anybody heard of Geronimo? Who for at least 10 years was fiercely fighting the settlers of the United States. Fierce warrior. Fierce warrior. You go out west, you hear about Geronimo. You hear all about Geronimo. And he was feared by soldiers. He killed many soldiers. And what is interesting to me is they tamed the guy. So much so that a guy named Buffalo Bill Cody befriended him, and then somehow they agreed to do Wild West stories together. And they'd reenact some of those battles, which at the time they took place were full of blood and sorrow and tears. They took those very instances and made them into skits for their traveling show and made Buffalo Bill and Geronimo buddies. They even took their show to Europe. Do you understand my drift here? They took what was a fierce man that believed in fighting for his land, and then a fierce United States citizen who believed in fighting for land, and after all the war, years after all they were doing the killing of each other, they're like, oh, we could make this into a traveling show, and we could make a lot of money off what was real serious, but now people are just curious about what happened out west. In other words, people are into shows, into crowds, into sensationalism. And you got to believe people would have loved to have harnessed Jesus and make him their very own town show. He'd been the hit of Branson, Missouri. Total hit. This is a Jesus show. Bring your sick. Watch how that's done. I'm saying people on earth have earthly gain in mind. Jesus, read the book of Mark with the thought in mind of noticing how many times Jesus says, don't tell anybody, get the multitudes out of here. I'm not into what man is looking to make happen. I'm into doing the will of the Father and preaching his word and his ways. And the same as today, people blasted all over the place anyway, but they wanted to get what they could get from him physically, but they did not want to hear and understand his teachings. And furthermore, here's another thing. In addition to Jesus saying, get me away from around the crowds, he literally preached in such a way that only the people hungry for God could understand what he was saying. What do? We want to break it down and have some clever revelation. Everybody understands. We write a book on it, now we're popular. What did Jesus do? I'm preaching to the one that seeks God enough that he's going to try to figure out the revelation behind what I'm saying. Begin to meditate on the difference between Jesus and man and follow the ways of Jesus. Amen.